Hello and welcome to a webinar on all things alternate. My name is Dawn Embry King and I'm a coordinator at the West Virginia Department of Education. I am the coordinator of intellectual disabilities and my primary role at the department is working with the alternate standards, alternate assessment, and alternate diploma. And those are the three topics that we'll be discussing on today's webinar. So the objectives for today's webinar, we will be discussing federal updates regarding students with significant cognitive disabilities. We're going to look at the criteria for the alternate diploma, how to appropriately identify students for the alternate assessment. We will be looking at an all things alternate timeline, as well as examples and guidance around standards-based goals and instruction. I always say that I'm a big picture person. And so for us big picture people, we need to have a foundation of why we're doing what we're doing. And that's what I hope to have by this slide here, laying a foundation. What I have included are 5 different briefs. These are briefs from the National Center and State Collaborative. We call that NCSC. And each of these briefs really have helped me as I've done research and tried to look into information pertaining to students with significant cognitive disabilities all around standards-based instruction. So I chose these 5 briefs, and you will find these briefs attached so that you can do some research with them as well. And they are just excellent resource material in order to just learn as much as you can around, as I said, students with significant cognitive disabilities. The first brief is entitled Standards That Are the Same but Different. So of course we're talking about our alternate standards, the alternate standards being in direct alignment with our West Virginia College and Career Standards. Brief number 2 speaks about defining high expectations for students with significant cognitive disabilities. That's pretty self-explanatory, but so much of the focus around this work is how the importance of having high expectations for this particular population of students. Brief number 4, which I'm sure would be of importance to each of you as speech language therapists, is promoting communication skills in students with significant cognitive disabilities and how important that is to give those students a voice. Brief number 5 is standards-based IEPs for students who participate in the alternate assessment. And then brief number 8, general characteristics of students with significant cognitive disabilities. So I look at this slide as a way, as I said, of laying the foundation of why we're doing what we're doing, why we have made changes in relation to the requirements of ESSA, our Every Student Succeeds Act, and raising that rigor and high expectations for students with significant cognitive disabilities. Okay, as I mentioned, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA as it's better known, this is a federal law that was passed by Congress in 2015. And ESSA has made some pretty significant changes for students with significant cognitive disabilities around our alternate assessment and around alternate instruction for students with significant cognitive disabilities. You'll notice the slide I've also listed a Dear Colleague letter, and along with the briefs from the previous slide, I have also attached this Dear Colleague letter. If you will notice, the date on that is 2015 as well, so that was a big year between ESSA and this Dear Colleague letter. If those of you that may not be familiar with Dear Colleague letters, when there's a very important topic, something that needs attention from states around our nation, the United States Department of Education sends out Dear Colleague letters, and those go to all of the special education directors at each different state, and it just clarifies some information, points some things out, gives guidance. And this particular Dear Colleague letter is all around FAPE, Free and Appropriate Public Education for Students with Disabilities. As you're looking through this Dear Colleague letter, which each and every page is just full of vital information, but I would like you to pay a special attention to the top paragraph on page 5. The top paragraph on page 5 deals with and speaks to students with significant cognitive disabilities, and much of the information throughout this webinar is directly related to that paragraph on page 5 of the Dear Colleague letter. Since I mentioned FAPE in the previous slide in the Dear Colleague letter, I like to talk here a little bit about the Andrew F. decision. And the Andrew F. versus Douglas County School District, this was a United States Supreme Court decision that was handed down in 2017, and it was all around FAPE. And I just think it's very important that as educators working with students with disabilities that we're familiar with the Andrew F. case, and I challenge you to do a little Google search if you have not read anything about the Andrew F. case, and that you would just see what that's all about. And our next slide will go a little bit further into that discussion. So this quote that I have here in relationship to the Andrew F. decision says, "The problem is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but that our aim is too low and we reach it." So as we continue through this webinar, thinking about our students with significant cognitive disabilities, thinking about our alternate standards, our alternate assessment, and instruction, standards-based instruction for these students, I want us to really focus on our aim. And again, not that our aim is too high and that we miss it, or that our students are unable to reach that goal that might be set, but more importantly, that the aim and that the goal is too low, and that students are able to reach it and we're not moving them as far as we possibly can. I'd like you to take just a little bit and look over this slide, look at this timeline, which identifies 3 periods: the 1980s, the 90s, and then again the year 2015. And if you remember, 2015, the big year as far as our Every Student Succeeds Act and that Dear Colleague letter. So for those of you that are old enough to remember the 80s, maybe you were teaching in the 80s and the 90s, the emphasis in the 1980s was functional life skills curriculum. The emphasis was for students to fully participate in their community. Then in the 1990s, inclusion. That was the decade that we talked a whole lot about inclusion with same-age peers in their homeschool. I know as I was teaching during these years, in the 1990s, I was at a particular, at that time it was a junior high school, that the students were kind of clustered there. And rather than being in their home schools, they were clustered in this one area. And in the early 90s, that cluster school was dissolved. Students were then sent back to their home schools where they could be included and educated with their friends from their neighborhoods, from their churches, the kids that they, saw out on the playground each day. And so the 80s, the 90s, and then all around ESSA in 2015, if you'll notice the words involvement and progress, as we're thinking about our students, all students with disabilities, specifically students with significant cognitive disabilities, are they being involved, and maybe more importantly, are they making progress in general education, in that curriculum which is intended for all students? Okay, so now we have another timeline, and this is the timeline for our alternate standards, our assessment, and our diploma type. And across the top, we list the years down the side, those three areas. We're starting with last school year, the 2017-18 school year, and looking forward to the year 2020, 2020-21. And last year's ninth grade cohort. It was a really big year for last year's ninth grade cohort. If you will notice, that cohort is listed there in red. If you jump across to the year 2020-21 and down to the diploma type, for last year's ninth grade cohort, the year 2020-21 will be, that ninth grade cohort will be the first cohort that has the opportunity to graduate with an alternate diploma. Now, ESSA set some criteria in place that we're going to look very, very closely at in just a minute. And it all began with last year's ninth grade cohort. That's where West Virginia chose to start in implementing this move from a modified diploma to an alternate diploma. So last year's ninth graders are the first cohort with the opportunity to graduate with an alternate diploma in the year 2021, that spring. And that would, of course, be for students who do choose to graduate that year and not stay in school until they're 21. Okay, if we look at this school year, even before the school year started, on July 1 of 2018, our new standards went into effect. Our new alternate standards, that is policy 2520.16. They were written by a group of teachers, both general ed and special ed, had the opportunity to bring them in, and we wrote the alternate standards in direct, very closely, directly aligned with our West Virginia College and Career Standards. So those new standards, policy 2520.16, went into effect for the school year 2018-2019. Both last year and this year, and you'll notice all the way through to 2020, our alternate assessment is currently and will continue to be DLM. So there's no changes for our alternate assessment within these this span of time. And our modified diploma is also the diploma type for last year. Students graduated with a modified diploma. They will graduate this school year with a modified diploma. Next school year, 2019-2020, with a modified diploma. But as I said, the year 2020-21 will be the first year that an alternate diploma will be awarded to last year's ninth grade cohort, because they will have had time to go through each school year. They will be graduating seniors in the year 2020-21. So as I mentioned, ESSA has made some changes, and one of those changes is all around our state-defined alternate diploma. I have included another brief, and this is a brief from NCEO, and it is called Considerations for Developing State-Defined Alternate Diplomas for Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities. If you look through that brief, it gives descriptions and explanations and lots of details around three alternate diploma criteria. There's three separate pieces of criteria for students that graduate with an alternate diploma, and as we just talked about, it is last year's ninth graders that are the first to have that opportunity to graduate with an alternate diploma instead of a modified diploma in the year 2020-21. And here are those three criteria for an alternate diploma. First one being that instruction must be standards-based, aligned to the West Virginia College and Career Standards. So standards-based instruction based upon grade level content standards. We're going to talk much more about that in a little bit. The second is that that the same requirements that are in place for a regular diploma, for a general diploma, for students that are assessed on the West Virginia College and Career Standards, those exact same requirements are in place for students assessed on the alternate standards and graduating with an alternate diploma. Specifically, what that means is students must receive credits. This is what made it a little bit different for last year's ninth graders and each subsequent cohort after last year's ninth grade cohort, is that schedules and transcripts look a little bit different. We're no longer able to just say functional academics, daily living skills, but transcripts must reflect the same courses as for their general education peers, such as English 9, Algebra 1, or Math 1, Math 2, Biology. Now we have alternate course codes for each of those subject areas. We have our alternate standards, and then we also have a support document. And this support document is really beneficial to teachers. Of course, it's written for students, but it will help teachers to identify at what point that a student is working towards that grade level content standard. That support document can be found on our WVDE website, our Office of Special Education page, and the tab of intellectual disabilities. You will find the support document for the alternate standards, and that is criteria number 2. Criteria number 3 says that all of this must happen within the period of FAPE, and we know that that period is up until a student is 21 years old.